Good afternoon. Thank you. It's nice to see some of you folks that have came out today. It's nice to hear some good reaction. This is an important conversation that has affected so many of our lives. So, I hope that many of you can get involved in the discussion as we talk about opioid addiction and the epidemic that has plagued Appalachia and specifically parts of southern West Virginia. So thanks for coming to our panel discussion about opioid addiction and empowering solutions here in Appalachia. We've talked a lot about finding ways to make a difference. There's lots of different ways that you can make a difference in fighting the opioid epidemic. And part of the solution, as we've discussed today, is perhaps becoming a social worker. And this panel discussion this afternoon is sponsored by the social work department here at Concord University. And I've worked hard with Scott Ingram, and I want to say a special thank you to him for helping put this on and facilitating it and sponsoring it and helping to get the word out about it. So thank you very much, the social work department. He does. I'm Jessica Lilly, host and co-producer of Inside Appalachia with West Virginia Public Broadcasting. It's a radio show and podcast. How many of you have listened to the show? Oh, nice. Very nice. For those of you who listen, there should still be some magnets out in the lobby, and feel free to pick those up. And if you need more, I think we have a few more that we can hook you up with. Inside Appalachia is in the middle of a two-part show series. Last week, we aired the first of two shows that address addiction in Appalachia. We talked a lot about how we got here in West Virginia and parts of Appalachia. We looked into what the medical community is also doing to help the situation. The show explores the history of the introduction to OxyContin on the pharmaceutical markets, as well as the idea of adding pain as the fifth vital sign that medical professionals then added to their vital signs whenever they asked patients what was going on. So that's a part of the show that aired Sunday on West Virginia Public Radio, and you can still find it in a podcast at wvpublic.org. You can hear more of the discussion. So we had those things on the podcast as well as some other things in the discussion. We heard from here in West Virginia and Appalachia, we do have a lot of blue-collar type jobs with physical activity. We spoke to a gentleman who was injured on the job and became addicted to pain medications after becoming addicted or after being prescribed from his doctor. So you can hear more about that discussion by subscribing to the Inside Appalachia podcast on iTunes, at WV Public, or wherever you get your podcasts. And this Friday, we are also working we will share a follow-up podcast. The next episode will explore the unique challenges for veterans specifically, and addiction. So we'll further explore the connection between chronic pain and opioid addiction. We also explore alternatives to treating chronic pain, such as physical therapy, chiropractic, and even yoga. Especially, this is in light of the CDC's recent recommendations for doctors to first look at these types of alternatives before prescribing opioids. Again, you can hear that show by subscribing online. Okay, so just a quick rundown of Inside Appalachia, and we're in the middle of talking about this opioid epidemic as well. I'm very pleased to continue this conversation in this panel discussion with this live taping of an Inside Appalachia episode. Just to give you a heads up, we are streaming this online on YouTube. It will also be available on YouTube, and we will also be recording it, and then the discussion hopefully will end up in a future Inside Appalachia episode. So this is a way to let your voices be heard not only within this discussion, but hopefully reach a wider audience across the Appalachian region. So we hope you'll join in. And thank you to the panelists for agreeing to help with this experiment. This will be the second time that we've recorded a live taping of Inside Appalachia. So I appreciate your help with that, and appreciate you agreeing to come to the Campus Beautiful to share your expertise about this discussion. Now that I've rambled on and on and on, right? Let's get to let's hear from the experts. We do have representatives from mental health, substance abuse, those in recovery, and in political service to participate in this discussion. The discussion will focus on various issues and possible solutions for this ever-important social issue. And if I could also recognize really briefly, I would like to welcome our Concord University president, Dr. Kendra Bogus, who just joined us in the audience as well. So thank you for being here. Okay, so if we're ready, the way this will go down is I'll introduce the panelists and give them a few minutes to explain their role in fighting the opioid addiction epidemic and find out what inspired them to get involved in helping to solve these challenges. Okay, so if you're ready to get started, I think I've asked you that probably 10 times now. Who's ready? Nice. Okay. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Jessica Lilly. Today we're at Concord University thanks to the Social Work Department. We're talking about opioid addiction. Resources are limited in many rural communities across the country. And since southern West Virginia has been hit the hardest by this issue, we wanted to find out how folks are dealing with this epidemic in this region of Appalachia. So on the stage today we have Samantha Dinkins, and this will not go in order, obviously. Samantha Dinkins is in the middle. She is a Concord Master of Social Work student currently working with the Mercer County Day Report, and she's also in recovery as well. Samantha, thanks so much for being here. What inspired you to enroll in social work?
Well, it definitely was my life experience. I am a member in long-term recovery. I work a 12-step program. Growing up, I had a really great life. I can't say I had a bad life. I had very good, supportive parents. But I do have, and did then, had the addiction. I was born with the disease. It's not a choice. Today, I do have that choice. And I choose every day to work on my recovery. So my story began, my addiction led me to committing crimes against my parents. And my mom, having the tough love that I needed, she pressed charges on me. And I went to prison for 3 to 25 years. I actually did 3 of that 3 to 25. And today I'm working alongside the judge that sentenced me. And he values my opinion and wants to hear what I have to say. And I'm working at the Day Report where I used to be a client after I got released from prison. So needless to say, I definitely have the passion to do what I do today. It's a big part of who I am. It is who I am. And so I try to, when I work with the clients, I try to get them to see a different way and to ignite that fire that's within them. And I pull on every strength that I can possibly find. And I grab a hold of it and I don't let go.
And what's your role at the Day Report Center now?
I'm a case manager. Sorry, I get emotional.
No, let's give her a round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
And we also have House of Delegates member Ed Evans, who represents McDowell County. Delegate Evans, you are new to the House of Delegates. You were recently elected this last term. What role do you think the opioid addiction problem played in your decision to run for office?
McDowell County is a huge portion of my constituency. I also have a small portion of Mercer County. It's no secret that drugs have made their way into McDowell County in a huge way. The opioids have just gotten out of control. The crime rate that's related to that has skyrocketed. The death rate, the overdose rate. I had a dear friend who was the mayor of War who was actually murdered by a member of his own family for money for drugs. I've seen my students just addicted and having to turn to even prostitution to support their drug habits. I've long been an advocate for a treatment facility in McDowell County. That's no secret. There was recently a bill that was introduced into the House of Delegates, and it would put several facilities, we hope, into West Virginia. I lobbied very hard for one of those for McDowell. We wound up, the committee substitute wound up taking specific areas out of the bill. With that, I think Wood County was in there mentioned specifically. And when they amended Wood County out, I knew that it would just be a competition type thing. So if the governor signs that bill, we'll see some treatment facilities hopefully pop up here in West Virginia. And I really, really hope one of those shows up in McDowell. I've seen so many people affected by this disease, and we need to treat it as such. We need to stop, pushing these people into dark corners and saying they're just terrible people, when oftentimes they were addicted because of the need for actual pain medication. And one thing led to another where they became addicts. I'm not a huge proponent of locking them up. We spent a lot of the House of Delegates session coming up with longer sentences and more ways to literally lock them up. I mean, that just seemed like that was one of the focal points of the session was longer jail term instead of treatment and rehabilitation. So you'll see me advocating for that constantly. I'll be traveling to Washington, D.C. June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, speaking at an opioid conference. Very excited to do that and letting them know that West Virginia has a problem.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Also on the panel, we have Mr. Truman Chafin. He's a former senator. He currently works as an attorney in West Virginia. We've asked him to join our panel since he's representing several communities in West Virginia that are actually suing pharmaceutical companies. Tell us about what inspired you to take on these cases.
Thank you, Jessa, for inviting me, and Scott, very nice of you to invite us. As a longest-serving Senate Majority Leader for West Virginia, a lot of these facts and statistics came to my attention. And as an attorney, even more came to my attention. I want to share some of the facts with you all that came to my brain here and how it motivated me to get involved in these cases. West Virginia, Jessica, leads the nation in fatal drug overdoses. West Virginia is the most medicated state. 90% of the circuit court dockets are drug-related now. 40% of our regional jail inmates are on drug protocol, which is very expensive. 35% of the babies born in West Virginia are now born drug-addicted. Southern West Virginia is ground zero for the dumping of deadly, highly addictive opioid drugs by some major multinational drug distributors. Their actions are motivated by one thing and one thing alone: it's greed and huge payout money. The main distributors of these opioid, highly addictive, deadly drugs in Southern West Virginia are McKesson Corporation out of San Francisco, California, Cardinal Health out of Ohio, and AmerisourceBergen out of Pennsylvania. All are ranked in the top 25 revenue-generating companies in the nation. Last year, McKesson brought in $179 billion from selling these drugs. AmerisourceBergen and Cardinal, they're on the Fortune 500 list. They brought in excess of $1.25 billion. I got started in the lawsuits against these greedy manufacturers for one reason. I'm in Mingo County. I was a senator there. And as a senator and a lawyer, the mayor of the town of Kermit and the council came to me, Jessica. They have a population of 400 people down there. And a lot of you have been to Kermit. It's right on the Wayne County line. 400 population. In 2006, they received from these companies 3,194,000 dosage units of hydrocodone, ranking 22nd in the United States for 400 people. The pharmacy there was making $500,000 a month filling these prescriptions. They were doing it 24/7, one every minute. So that would be 7,986 units of these hydrocodones per person that they dumped into the town of Kermit. The damages are direct, indirect, prosecution of crimes, incarceration, as you all know, healthcare costs, unjust enrichment. The regional jails no county can afford to pay the bills. all of these came to my attention, and people came to ask me, Senator at first and then a lawyer later, would you lead the charge in suing these companies? We represent McDowell County, Mercer County, Lincoln County, Webster County, Mason County, Barber County, and Taylor County. We represent the towns of Kermit, Gilbert, Welch, Williamson, Chapmanville, Hamlin, West Hamlin, and Webster Springs, and there will probably be others. Ladies and gentlemen, these companies need to be held accountable. We have filed suits in these counties and are going to file in the others, Jessica, and we expect to have testimony from highly qualified, trained people to hold them accountable.
And it sounds like a very strong case, or at least part of the case that you're presenting. And I'll also add, as a journalist, McKesson or any of those pharmaceutical companies, if you're interested in speaking out and talking with us, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say.
I got to add this. Last week, we're about to represent, I think, Mingo County, where I live. Cardinal sent their lawyers to the county commission, asking them and begging them not to sue them. They said, if you do, you might bring in some local people and hurt some local people. Now that to me is just outrageous beyond outrageous, that they are now going to these different counties and cities and saying, you know, don't sue us. And that's talk about guilt. I think they understand what they've done.
It is interesting to see the massive amount of pills that entered some of these very small communities, like you mentioned, and part of that reporting was done by a West Virginia reporter, actually from the Charleston Gazette, who recently won a Pulitzer Prize for uncovering that.
Eric, he's been in our office, and we worked with him on the town of Kermit.
Eric
and all these
Ayer.
stacks
It's pretty impressive.
Great,
It'll be interesting to see how that comes out. Also want to introduce Marie Newcomb. She is an adjunct. She's an adjunct here within our social work program here at Concord University. Also, she's been a social worker for more than 40 years. All of those years has been in hospitals. She's the team leader in mental health at Beckley Appalachian Regional Hospital. Marie, tell us about your work and what inspired you to start this out. I mean, that's been 40 years ago, I guess, but.
I was thinking about that last night, and I happened to be friends with 3 people whose mothers were social workers. And I knew that I wanted to be in a helping profession, and as soon as I was able to put a title and sort of a job description with that, I knew that was what I wanted to do, and I never stopped thinking any other thing after that. I've been blessed to have lots of different experiences as a social worker, but my passion is hospital social work, particularly the psychiatric aspect of that.
Can you explain the difference? You say your passion in particular is hospital and psychiatric. For those of us who might not be super familiar with that and how it differentiates from other types of social work, help us understand that a little better.
Well, hospital social workers and folks who work in inpatient psychiatric units have a very short time period to work with folks. And generally, we're seeing people sometimes at the very worst point of their lives. And it's a job that you have to be certainly compassionate, you have to be focused and attentive, but you also have to begin thinking about what resources you might be able to suggest to those folks. You have to listen, but it's very intense, and oftentimes we don't get to see the results of our work. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we're putting people back together and helping them get back into their lives.
Some people still might ask the question, well, you talk about the psychiatric unit. Can you explain the connection between mental health services and addiction and why that needs to be in the same conversation?
Certainly. I've been in mental health for probably the last 25 years. Many of our folks that are on our unit for inpatient treatment and a lot of the folks that we see in our emergency room are suffering from mental illness, but they also have a coexisting difficulty with drug addiction. In the beginning, when I first started working, it was alcohol, and very rarely did we see anyone with a drug problem. Now it's totally reversed. I never thought in my life that I would see people on heroin, but we're seeing that weekly, actually sometimes daily. Probably half the people in our units have some connection with drug addiction. Either it's the person that has the drug addiction or it's a family member. It's a child who's been removed from the home because of addiction, or it's a parent or brother or sister who has definitely had difficulties managing because of the behavior of the person that was addicted. So it's very, very important. And you have to, if you have an addiction and you have a coexisting mental illness, then you need to treat both.
Thank you for being here. And finally, on the end, we have Melanie Danielson. Melanie Danielson is with Recovery Point in Bluefield, West Virginia. No? Nope, not at all. Just kidding. Sorry about that. Melanie, well, tell us who you're with, Melanie.
I'm with Highland House, which is through Case, West Virginia.
Okay, Highland House with Case, West Virginia. What inspired, you work with women. What inspired you to help and work specifically with women?
Well, I'm also a person in long-term recovery, and so after I got into treatment, I knew very, very quickly while I was in the 28 days that it's what I wanted to do, and so definitely didn't see it growing to this magnitude, but it's been a very big blessing, and I was very, very blessed that the same facility hired me when I was at that point where I could be employable by them, and so I'm actually licensed. I'm a peer recovery coach through the West Virginia Board of Addiction and Prevention Professionals, so I have my PR credential, and I actually go to school. I'm not social work. I did choose to go into criminal justice, but it's, gosh, when I graduate, it will have taken me 20 years to get a 4-year degree, but I keep chipping away at it, and I love working with women. It is my heart, and I'm just real grateful that I have the opportunity to do so.
You mentioned you're studying criminal justice. I'm curious to find out what you're hearing as in getting the training for criminal justice. How are they approaching education for criminal justice and approaching addiction and the opioid epidemic?
In my classes that I have, like I have a substance abuse class that's this semester, and they talk about treatment. They don't really talk about incarcerating people so much. They do emphasize a lot of, being able to identify, what people need and being able to get them into the proper treatment that they need.
That's interesting. Samantha, I want to get back to you if I could. When you shared your story earlier and got emotional, understandably, and you mentioned that it's a fight every day.
Yeah.
Were you ever hesitant to share your story, or, what does sharing your story do for you, have you found?
Well, sometimes it's very vulnerable. It puts you in a very vulnerable, state. But sharing is a part of healing. When you share, you're giving hope to other people, and you're showing them that there is a way, and they just believe in themselves, and they can get the support. Recovery is all-inclusive. There's fellowships everywhere. There's people to help. I understand, and as a social worker, not everybody has the family support that I had. Some people come from broken, families, and you have parents that use and even teach children, their children to use. So, there is support, and the fellowship is there to help. And I just love what I do. I love what I do, and I love working at the Day Report because we're at the hub, so we get everything filtered through there, and it's great. It's great.
What made you decide to pursue a master's degree in social work? What made you decide to enroll at Concord University and in the Master of Social Work program?
Just to keep going. It's a part of my recovery. It's a part of who I am. I love being a social worker. Concord has the one-on-one. They get to know you. They're another family. And I just love the support I get and all the people that I've met along the way. It helps. And I just want to keep going. And after I get my master's, I want to get my clinicals. And I've even thought about a PhD. I don't know. We'll see. So,
Good for you.
thank you.
Good for you.
Melanie, along those same lines, Samantha's talking, obviously a female and talking about women in recovery. Can you speak to what some of the challenges are and the resources or lack thereof as far as in the state of West Virginia for women in recovery?
There's definitely not enough. I know long-term beds, there are approximately 811 of those beds. 200 of those beds are for females. And of those 200 beds, 88 of those are for women and children. So we're looking at anywhere between right around 70% of all the beds that are in West Virginia are for males. And there's even less resources for women and children. Even in the essence of recovery housing, there's way more of those facilities than there are for male facilities. And I worked, where I worked at Prestera prior to coming up here to Bluefield, we worked, they have Renaissance, which is a long-term for women and children. And they're women, like she was mentioning about the co-occurring disorders, 99.9% of women that are incarcerated have a childhood trauma. So it's not that they're bad people, they're just broken. And they're trying to figure out, other ways to cope with their life. And sometimes they come up short and their addiction gets, fed that way. And so being able to get people the proper treatment that they need, because these women, they're just broken, There's a lot of poverty, a lot of domestic violence in the state of West Virginia. There's been a lot of things that have gone on, and a lot of women end up suffering from those things. And so it leads to, addiction.
With your specialties and your training and your knowledge about this, for the women who perhaps might hear this that don't know how to get help and are looking for beds and treatment, do you have any words of encouragement or advice that you feel comfortable sharing with the audience?
Well, my advice is to blow the phones up. I mean, that's really the truth. Like, if you want to get into treatment, blow their phone up. You ring it 24/7. That's about the best advice that I can give anybody, because there's not enough places. Fortunately, like, I've been blessed that I've had the opportunity to work alongside of several different facilities. And so, the West Virginia Helpline, that, the new one that's there, that is a fantastic resource for people to call, because they keep you on the line while they get you placed in detox. And so it is a wonderful, wonderful resource that they have. But I do know there's a lot of women that run into issues. I mean, a lot of people talk about treatment, but a lot of the people that end up back into treatment. So they end up coming back through. And like, I'm a huge advocate in aftercare. There's not enough aftercare. And
What do you mean aftercare? How does
like,
that
what
work?
happens post-discharge? Okay, so you go to detox, you go to treatment, you graduate, you're doing great, and you get out in the real world. I hate to put it this way, but it's very easy for somebody to stay clean while they're in a treatment center. But when you get out here and the real world stressors hit you, then there's the difficulties. And then kids. Moms only have about 18 months to 2 years to get in compliance with CPS to even get their rights back to their children. If somebody's been incarcerated and then at that point in time they've gone to long-term treatment, by the time they got out, like, they've only got 2 or 3 months to get themselves together before they get their children back. And then there's daycare, there's transportations. People don't have driver's license. They can't get jobs. If they have a past record, they can't get a job. So when they get out, they get beat down, and they get beat down, and they get beat down, and they go back to doing what they've always done because it's all they've ever known, and they end up right back in the same vicious cycle.
You mentioned poverty and treatment and inpatient treatment beds and post-care and all of these things that are really expensive. And I'd like to open this up to the entire panel. How do, as you all know, I'm sure, or you've probably heard, West Virginia is in a budget crisis right now. We are trying to figure out a way to balance the budget. Our representatives are. Delegate Evans, perhaps you could help answer this question, because I'm sure you'll go back there next month or sometime to balance that budget. It's a tough job that I'm certainly glad that I don't have right now, but how do we find the resources, and what do we do? What creative solutions are there to finding a way to reach people who are suffering within West Virginia and Appalachia?
I'm just going to say that since the Affordable Care Act, it's probably the best thing that, as far as I'm concerned, since I've been a social worker, that has happened in healthcare. We had people that before would not get any treatment at all. Now they're able to at least access, and if they don't need inpatient treatment, they're able to get outpatient treatment. They're able to pay for their medications. That's so critical for folks that need them. Paying for Vivitrol. That's a drug that helps, it's a medication that helps with controlling craving. Before we had the Affordable Care Act and we had more access to Medicaid, these people had no resources. And it's just made a tremendous difference.
I was just going to mention the Affordable Care
You're
Act.
right.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm very concerned that, that if it doesn't stay together in a form that allows the funds that have been flowing into West Virginia to continue, that we will see a huge backset of our addicted people, that they'll,
Truman Chafin.
I'm sure it's McKesson.
We'll forgive you then. Let me talk to him.
I don't know. It's also a matter of priorities, you know. Priorities to every member of the legislature is their home district. And sometimes the priorities of the state suffer for the priorities of the individual district. In McDowell County, if there's any place that needs treatment facilities, that's it. Unfortunately, a lot of the money goes to the larger cities. People that are having issues in southern West Virginia wind up traveling to the bigger cities for treatment. And that's another issue in itself. They may not have the transportation. If they do, they certainly don't have money for hotel stays or whatever for their families and themselves.
We spoke to a woman at the Charleston Treatment Facility who said that there's a gentleman who walks, I think, 9 hours every day just to get there to get treatment because he's that determined to find treatment. He doesn't have, it's not close. So, yeah. Wasn't there a discussion about having a treatment facility in McDowell County at one time? And
Prior to going up to Charleston, right after my election, I've been working with a gentleman. His name is Bobby Cartwright, and Bobby helped write the program for Virginia. He's a certified addiction specialist, gang treatment specialist, on and on and on. Bobby has incredible credentials. And we have been working to find just a building to do it in. He actually has resources, backers that will help him get this going. And working with the McDowell Commission and everybody else, there's just not a building available. And that's the worst part about it. You know, here's someone who wants to come in, make a difference, you know, can put people to work, you know, and, you know, nurses, whatever's required for the facility, cooks, for example. And not even a building available to do this in. I talked with another gentleman who may be able to help with that particular portion of it. We'll see how that comes out. But and then when I got to Charleston, working with the other delegate about the bill I mentioned earlier, hopefully we'll see some funds for local treatment facilities. And again, I have to say hopefully, you know. I recently spoke with the program director for the McDowell County Corrections Facility, and he told me that part of his job, in order for him to discharge various inmates, was that they had to have beds to put them in, you know, for their addictions. And they're just not there. So these people continue to have longer and longer incarceration times. There are so many problems. I mean, when we all know that. But until you start dealing with this and seeing firsthand what is truly necessary, and it comes back to funding, and it comes down to those beds.
And I also want to mention really quickly to the audience not to forget that we will be taking questions, so hopefully you're taking notes. If there's anything that you have follow-up questions about or you want to join in the conversation, it will be shortly that you'll be able to join. Delegate Evans, I wonder, can you share any of the conversation about what's happening in Charleston and what they're saying in Charleston? You mentioned that it has to be priorities. We hear about the statistics. There are, you know, an economist from WVU mentioned that there are 5 counties in southern West Virginia that are enduring an economic situation comparable to that of the Great Depression. And that includes McDowell, Wyoming, Boone, Logan,
Lincoln.
And Lincoln, thank you. Which are also, those counties are also suffering from opioid addiction. McDowell County has some of the most, the toughest statistics, not only in the state but in the country, when you talk about overdose death rates, as well as other parts in southern West Virginia. So can you share what the conversation is in Charleston when it comes to priorities, and we hear these numbers that continuously put West Virginia and this part of Appalachia on the map? What are our lawmakers saying?
Unfortunately, from my perspective, it's not good, because what we're doing is looking for ways to lock people up longer. Most of the bills that that came out of the House of Delegates involved longer prison sentences, longer times in jail. I'll just say it that way. I mean, that's the truth. I kept lobbying for things on the front end, treatment prior to incarceration, jobs. If people have a way to pay the bills, to take care of their families, then they may not have to go down that path.
And can we afford to lock these people up?
No, we absolutely can't. The amount of money that it costs to lock a person up for 1 year is about $27,000.
And Melanie, perhaps you can you speak to that in studying criminal justice and talking about that? I know that you said that in your education and what your training that you're getting now, they're still talking about treatment and things like that, but I can't represent that that viewpoint of law enforcement accurately. Perhaps you can give some insight on, there are some dangerous people who commit crimes, I suppose, that, but how can we find that balance of figuring out what to do?
Well, a lot of times the criteria for people to go into certain places, I think sometimes are backwards, and I'm just going to be honest. Like for people to do outpatient, like drug courts, things like that, they have to be medium to high risk, right? And so we have people that are high risk that really need treatment that are doing outpatient services. And we have people that are low risk that they really don't have very many services to be offered. And so sometimes it's a little backwards. Like I do know, like at our house, the Highland House, it is a 12-bed female facility, but it's through the Justice Reinvestment. So all of the girls in our house, have some type of charges. So, but they stay there for free. Like they don't ever have to pay a dime. Like, so we're a grant-funded facility.
And what is that, usually federal grants, I guess? And
Well, yeah. But like I said, it comes through the Department of Justice.
Oh, yeah.
Is who ours comes through. And so, but it gives our girls the ability that as they're there and they're doing their outpatient treatment and they're growing, they can get jobs and they can save money and hopefully work on vehicles and do those types of things. And I don't know of anybody else in the state that offers free services that way. I do know that Recovery Point, their cost for their people to go through there is $25 a day. So, but some of the system, sometimes it seems like it's a little backwards. And so I think there's just some areas that we still need to work on. And, if somebody's high risk and they've been in and out of institutions and facilities for the last 20, 30 years of their life, like they need long-term treatment. They don't need outpatient services. And so I think sometimes it's just a little backwards.
What's the role of Narcotics Anonymous and like other community support entities like that when it comes to long-term treatment and recovery? How important is that? And that's Melanie or perhaps Marie, you could speak to that?
Well, I would just say we need more. I frequently am looking and doing computer searches for patients who want to be actively involved, and I can't find a Narcotics Anonymous meeting any closer than Charleston. And that's dependent upon that community a lot. I don't know what we can do to support that community.
That was my next question.
We just really need to, I think because there's so much value in that peer support, professionals can do a lot, but there's no substitute for somebody that's actually been through it and can experience it and can give them a different perspective than what I can.
I wonder, and maybe you all in the audience would have some more insight into this, but what does it take to start an NA group and an NA program? I wonder if you can just go on their website, contact them, and if a community felt empowered to do that, like how do you even go about starting this and say, I'd like to start I'd like to go to some NA meetings, but there aren't any of the closest ones in Charleston, so maybe I can help start that myself. I wonder if that's even possible.
Two addicts join together and can make a fellowship. I mean, it can just starts with two people getting up with churches, getting the word out, letting the community know, getting up with the board for the district, let them know, that you're going to have a meeting, what time, and so that way it's viewable online. So that's the way it can get started.
So churches have played a
Yes.
role in...
Yes.
Yes.
Help explain that a little bit. I know that there's one in Mercer County in Princeton that has a 12-step program similar to the 12-step programs of recovery, but they recognize the 12th step as the higher power as being very specific. Is that a part of it, or is it just sometimes necessarily just facilitating the
Yeah.
building?
Well, our church, and I'm very proud to say the church that I attend, hosts an AA meeting just about, I think, 6 days a week. And that's a really important part of what we feel like we need to do for the community. It's pretty much unseen by the members unless you happen to be there in the evening. But I feel like that's probably one of the most important things that we do. And there are other churches in our town that also open their doors. And it's very, we have a relationship with them, but it's very quiet and pretty much unseen.
Okay. We've got about 15 minutes left in this particular discussion. We will have extra time afterwards to keep it rolling, I think, for about 45 more minutes. So if you have any questions, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, Lucas Berry is going to make your way over. And while he makes his way over, I'm going to open it up to the panel. Is there anything specifically that you all wanted to touch on or say really quickly before we get to this question? We can just see what they have for us then, I guess.
I did, one of the gals that I was talking with from Recovery Point this morning said something that I thought was very, very profound, and she, unfortunately, I don't remember her name, but she said, it should be as easy to get into treatment as it is to get drugs. And if we could make that happen, we would really be making a huge headway.
And specifically, opioids and prescription
Yes.
drugs.
Yes.
Even though, as we've learned, through the investigation of, there's lots of different channels of accountability that should have been responsible, and it seems that the more we dig into this, the more we find that often it got tied up in a bureaucratic mess, and meanwhile, our loved ones are dying. It's a good point. Okay, who has a question? Will you stand up and say your first and last name, please?
My name is Beth Sizemore, and I'm the executive director of REACH Family Resource Center in Summers County. We also serve Mercer County. Someone said, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, I think it was you, Mr. Chafin, that said 35% of babies in West Virginia are born addicted right now. And I work at an agency that we have a child advocacy center. So one of our programs is we work with children who've been physically and sexually abused. We have forensic interviewers who conduct those interviews and help that family through the court process, and then of course follow up with therapy and counseling for those children and their non-offending parent. And our statistics show that 80% of the children that are physically and sexually abused, there's some form of substance abuse or addiction that's going on in that family. I think the same is true probably with DHHR and their CPS cases, maybe even higher. I do have a question. I'm going to get to it. So
I'm taking notes.
there is a huge study that's been out for quite a while now, and it's called ACE. It stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's a 10-question survey that people can take, and the higher you score on this, the worse your outcomes are going to be. And it's questions like, when you were between the age of birth and 18, were either one of your parents incarcerated? Were your parents divorced? Was anyone in your house suffering from mental illness? Was anybody addicted? Things like that. And so children who have a low ACE score are less likely to have these kind of problems in their adulthood. But they've also shown that the lower your ACE score is, the less likely you are to have chronic disease. It's actually affecting the length of people's lives. Getting diabetes, cancer, mental health issues. And so I understand that treatment is extremely important, and I'm a big proponent of treatment. But I think we even have to go back farther than that, and we have to find a way to be prevention-based. We have to make sure that our children aren't exposed to this. Now, we can't write off a whole generation of people that we've got going on right now that are suffering from this. But we're going to have a bigger problem 20 years from now than we have right now, because these people that are addicted have children, and these children are being traumatized on a daily basis. And I guess maybe I don't have a question. I guess I'm very concerned about, and like I said, I think treatment is very important, but I really think that we've got to focus on prevention. We've got to be building healthy, strong, resilient children. I just worry because we have a generation of grandparents right now raising kids because their adult children can't do it. But what's going to happen when these grandparents die and these drug addicts are the grandparents? They are not going to be able to take care of anybody. We're going to have so many children in an already flooded foster care system. I don't know. I think I'm painting a really gloom and doom picture, and I'm actually not that kind of person. But I just want to say that one of my favorite quotes is from Frederick Douglass, and he said, "It's easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men." And I just feel like we've got to focus on prevention and building strong kids in West Virginia.
So, and a couple things, and if you all want to jump in, feel free. The parents who are addicted, like you mentioned, Beth, we're seeing a very sharp increase in parents or foster parents who are needed. And I heard a story earlier that said that some children were sleeping in the DHHR office because their parents couldn't take care of their children, and it's a really difficult situation. However, I know you're not a gloom and doom person, but it's not, there are options for people who are concerned, I think, to get involved and become foster parents, right? So that's one way to do it and get the training that you need to be a great foster parent and help to take care of those children. And then you raised your hand, and after you speak, Dr. Beasley, if you would be interested in talking about, to follow up on Beth's question, the resilience scale and prevention and helping, so in addition to that, helping to build resiliency in children and to let these children know that they can overcome these obstacles. So, but you raised your hand, you want to talk about foster?
Yes.
Just to follow up on what you said about foster care, for instance, in Summers County, there are currently, I think, 38 children out of home in placement in DHHR's custody, and there's only 3 foster homes. So your point was great. Like, if you really want to be involved and do so, that is a great, tangible thing that you can do, become a foster home.
And if I could jump in too, I don't think you're painting a gloom and doom portrait at all. But what you are painting is a portrait of reality. In McDowell County, depending on which year it is, somewhere around 58% of the kids there do not live with their mom and dad. We're talking about living with grandparents, we're talking about living with aunts and uncles, and in some cases they're siblings. Parents have these children for whatever reason, and I promise you drugs play a huge part in this. They're left, just literally left, with someone else. Mm-hmm. So it's not that it's gloom and doom, it's reality. And what we have to do is figure out a way to take care of these kids so they don't lead to the same path that their parents chose. Kids care data, or kids count data. I'm sure many of you have heard of the kids count data. And it gives you some indicators of healthy lifestyles. And when you read those for West Virginia versus the nation, and when you start looking at some of the counties versus counties, southern West Virginia's statistics are absolutely eye-opening.
But we do have some of the most resilient, hardworking, tough people in the country. I would go to say that. And then back on foster parenting as well, a lot of times we have foster parents and then they decide to adopt, so then that takes them off of the foster parent list and they might not be able to foster any more children, so it keeps going.
That's correct.
But you,
My name is Paul Orton, and I just want to interject here because I work for KVC West Virginia. We're a foster care and adoption service agency, and I'm always out trying to recruit foster parents. So really listen about how the need that's out there. The statistics are staggering. It's something that's very important. It's the only way we're going to fix the community. It's super important. Thank you.
and these are innocent children. Dr. Beasley, are you interested in commenting on the resiliency? And I would I interviewed her a while back about the grit scale, which it's just stuck with me since you mentioned that, and it brought so much hope to me whenever we talk about things like that. Can you explain that?
Sure. The grit scale, this is research out of the University of Pennsylvania. Angela Duckworth has developed this scale, basically measuring grittiness and sort of long-term perseverance and that resiliency that you talked about, Jessica, that I do feel like as West Virginians, that's something we really should be proud of, because I do feel like we have a lot of grit in southern West Virginia. But we're really trying to, that research has shown a lot of correlations between grit and, for example, academic success in K-12 in college. So we're really trying to instill that in our students at Concord too. A lot of them come in very gritty, but at the same time there are ways to build grit too, through things like teaching students that hard work and effort really does make a difference, that your talents and skills aren't fixed or innate, but that this growth mindset that through hard work and effort you can really improve and become grittier.
That's right. And so perhaps, Beth, when you have this, the scale, the ACE that you were talking about, and trying to pair those up with the grit scale, might help to create hope and instill grittiness in those children so that they will continue to recognize their resiliency and grittiness. And that's with Angela Duckworth, and her research can be found online. You can take that grit test online. I don't know the website, but Angela Duckworth, I'm sure you can Google it. I've been impressed with it. And we have another question.
Okay, so Sabrina Schrader, being a person who has 9 out of the 10 ACEs on her checklist and more from childhood to adulthood, what I see is the only way that we are going to fix West Virginia is to heal West Virginia. And it's not just the children, and it's not just prevention. We have to heal everybody. These adverse childhood experiences follow you through adulthood. And what I have seen, because I have experienced all this hell throughout my whole life, and I'm still experiencing it, is children who did not grow up with poverty like I did, when they become adults, and they start to go through the things that I did as a child. While I had many great childhood experiences too, my parents taught me wonderful things that I live by now. Throughout my whole life, I've lived by the things my parents have taught me. The adults who didn't go through the things I did can't make it. They don't know what to do. And I grew up hard, and I grew up tough, and I am very strong. And most of West Virginians are, and separating children from their families, it's not going to work. Over 90% of children that are in foster care end up worse off when they're separated from their parents than where they were before. So we have to help parents become better. And I've heard Kendra Bogus say before, we have to provide more services to parents to help them. We were born in a generational poverty. This is not just one generation, this is generations. And the people on the ground are going to have to help the people under the ground so we can all thrive together. Right now, more people are dying in West Virginia, every state, than are being born. So while we talk about 35% of babies are born addicted, we're not helping their mothers. And we're not helping people like me who's 33 years old and want to have a child in this state, because it is hard to live here. So we got to get involved and change these systems that are controlling us and causing us to die young.
Thank you, Sabrina. It is the whole community and so many very complex situations that the whole community like you mentioned, Sabrina, under the ground, at ground level, all over, that's definitely being affected and is going to have to work to try and find these solutions. I'll open it up to the panel. Do you all have anything to talk about? Well, I have a question that perhaps you all could help. Samantha, maybe you can speak to this, I don't know, but how do we overcome this stigma that makes it taboo to talk about addiction and recovery? You, as a recovering addict, you said that how important it is to talk about your story and to share your story, that that's part of recovery, but yet it still seems taboo to talk about things like this. And, you know, I'm not sure, I'm so glad to see that you all showed up to this discussion, but it's not always easy to talk about, even with your loved ones, if you're the people that you know within your family, your friends, things like that, that might be dealing with this. How do we create a situation that's not taboo and address that stigma?
There's really not one answer, I don't think. You have different kinds of people in this world. You know, you have some individuals that put down addicts. They think it's a choice. They don't think it's a disease. So I think the more that we talk about it, the more recovery programs that open, the more recovery focused that this area becomes, the less the stigma will have the effect on people, and the more that people will be comfortable to talk and to get help and to reach out. So
I think it's interesting when we hear from these professionals that deal with it on a daily basis, and we find out how massive the problem is, but we don't necessarily hear about it, and we don't necessarily talk about it a whole lot one-on-one. You might read it in a newspaper, hear it in a report, but I don't know, maybe your family, your communities are a little different than mine, but I don't necessarily see that happening too much.
I don't think it's taboo at all to talk about it. I got to disagree with you just a little bit. I think we have to talk about it. The only way to bring this out of the darkness is to start educating kids younger. You know, we need to have these programs in our schools. You know, just like we have math and science, we need to have, you know, programs that let kids know the dangers of these problems. Then we also have to, we got to find ways in which we prevent these people from doctor shopping, for example. We got to find ways to get them into treatment. You know, the whole gamut here has got to be brought into the light. It's not taboo to talk about it. It's taboo that we don't talk about it.
Jessica, I think we also need to contact our elected officials, especially the governor, and let them know that the DHHR, okay, and all the support services they have, that people want support for families. For the last year I was in the legislature, there was like 9,000 or 10,000 child abuse calls that came to DHHR hotlines that didn't have personnel to respond to. Okay, this could be serious. And until we beef up the DHHR, the social work, the help that these people need, and the state recognizes that we need mental health counseling and what have you, it's a matter of dollars, I know. But if you got something that's killing your society and something that's highly addictive and deadly as drugs, you know, it should be priority number one.
And the senator's exactly right. You know, I'm just going to open this can of worms up. You know, we're going to have to pay these people what they're worth too. You know, we're going to have to appropriate money to hire more and more social workers so we can bring caseloads down so that the treatment and the time that they get is effective. The legislature has to realize, and as the senator said,
as you know, I'm lasered in like a laser beam to get some money for these counties. So if you see your county commission or city council, thank them for what they're at least standing up to some of these huge drug distributors, trying to get some resources.
Mr. Chafin, if you had a dream for the money that, if you win these cases and you had a dream for how this money would be spent, have you talked with them at all as far as the communities on what they hope to?
Yes, they all ask us that. If we recover money with the county commission, will it be encumbered? It will not be encumbered. They can do as they want. But I would suggest to them, West Virginia is like 5 states. You have, you know, the southern part and the middle part, eastern and northern panhandles, and they're all different. But I would suggest that places like Concord, Marshall, WV State, WVU, and Marshall, you know, all around the state, have a brain trust that they get the professionals together that could advise these commissions who they need to hire and how they need to spend these dollars, and I'll strongly recommend that.
You're shaking your head.
Yes, I agree with that. It needs to be community-based, but you need some expertise, because just throwing money at it's not going to
Exactly.
solve it.
If they don't know how to spend it, it'll just be wasted.
I think we had another question in the audience.
My name is Melanie Farmer. I work here at Concord, but I'm also a social worker and spent some time working in a detox unit with Southern Highlands here in Princeton. We've talked a lot about prevention and treatment, but I think we also need to go to that grassroots level of talking about the environment. There's been a lot of research in addiction that has shown that environment plays a huge role in the recovery of an addict. So what are we doing as communities to build up positive environments? Because a lot of these folks, like the small towns, you guys have mentioned like Kermit and things of that nature, they have such an environment that is so enriched into the drug, lifestyle, that it's hard for someone to go into recovery and go back into those environments. So I think when we talk about things being taboo around, talking about drugs, what's taboo is what are we going to do as community members? So I think that's a good point that maybe we can put out to the panel to talk about what can communities do to build those beyond, having those AA meetings, NA meetings, things of that nature, but what can they do to provide those supportive environments?
We talked about how important funding is, how important treatment is, how important beds are, and the whole community, and for people who do find treatment and recovery and then they go back. I think you're saying it might make for a difficult situation. And perhaps while we look for different entities to try and bring money and find solutions, how can we as individuals, if the person, the grandmother, the mother, the aunt, the uncle, within their communities, if they want to help, how can they get involved themselves aside from going to a church? I know we talked about trying to create those meetings and things like that. And anybody in the audience, how we can do it?
I think it was neat, the tables that were set up. I visited with many of the vendors before we had lunch today, and it was cool to hear all the cool things that each one of the individual vendors brought to the table. We need to find a way to bring all these people, not just the ones that were here today, but everybody to the table and see what they actually have to offer. It's not what we, the old saying is, let's not reinvent the wheel. If there are programs that these people are offering right now, let's find out how we can put people in touch with them.
So networking and making connections and things like that?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly opportunities for employment. That's a huge thing.
And, one of the problems we have now is that the mines are hiring people back and recruiting workers, but a huge percent cannot pass the drug test.
Oh, yeah, geez.
And that's a real problem to getting our economic engine running again.
I've heard employers talk about that challenge. I haven't seen any recent data that talked about how, the issues that they have now. And I think there was, after Upper Big Branch, state legislation that passed that they have to pass the drug test in the mining industry specifically before they go and work in the mines as well. You were going to say something, Samantha?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just wanting to add that even like we were saying with employment, for myself, even after I got the degree and got my bachelor level social work license, I have failed 9 job interviews simply because I had a background, and it had nothing to do, with my education, with my qualifications or anything. It just simply had to do because I was a convicted felon.
In the legislature this year, we passed the Second Chance Act. And I think the Second Chance Act is maybe one of the most critical pieces of legislation that the state of West Virginia has seen in a long time. We're going to give people like, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Samantha.
Samantha. We're going to give people like Samantha that second chance, and we're going to expunge those things from people's records, and we're going to give people their lives back, and we're going to give them an opportunity to go to work. And I think that's, if I were someone to ask me what was the most important thing you did in the legislature this year, I'd say to cast my vote for the Second Chance Act. So help's on the way. And God bless you for wanting to work. And let's get some people to, find a way to get these drug tests passed. I mean, there are jobs available. I always think about the McDowell FCI, Federal Corrections Institute. When they built that, they promised 80% or something like that of the jobs would go to McDowell Countyans. Well, they couldn't possibly fill those jobs because of not being able to pass the drug test. So now they have vans that literally run from Mercer and McDowell and bring other people from out of the county to that facility to work. So
I think part of that challenge was also the age of residents in McDowell County as well.
Yeah, I think so, but the big thing was the drug test.
I think we have enough time for maybe one or two more questions from the audience or comments, even if you just have comments that you'd like to share. Also, a quick reminder, if you do have an addiction diary story that you'd like to share, there are still note cards in the hallway that you can share anonymously. It's a semi-private hallway. There are exits here. There is a door there still, and then also you can, of course, share any of your comments and stories with West Virginia Public Broadcasting at feedback@wvpublic.org if you want to share your story that way. So are there any other questions, comments from the audience?
Myself have a question, actually.
Sure.
When we
Say
talk
your
about
name.
Lucas Berry, when we talk about the situation regarding jobs after discharge, we all know there's a stigma with recovering people. How do we advance from that in terms of if an employer is looking at a resume, and instead of saying absolutely not, I will never hire you, how do we go from that to I'm willing to give you a second chance? That's a long, hard road to hoe, but how do we get it done?
You keep going. You go to the next door. That closes, and if that doesn't open, you go to the next door. If that doesn't open, you go to the next door. You don't stop. You keep going.
Well, if delegate Evans is successful in the second chance, they would be violating the law if they discriminate against you and you're into the second chance
But
category.
the second chance is, 10 years? You have to be off paper or out of...
Which has to be written.
That's an awful long time for someone to get there.
It's not a perfect system, but it's on the way.
Right, okay.
I mean, it is a tremendous, it's something we've never had. And I'll tell you right now, the number of calls that we received for second chance was phenomenal. So there are people out there that want it badly, and I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure that it comes to fruition. Prejudice are a tough thing to overcome, young man, and we saw that in passing medical marijuana legislation. Some of the older generation people that saw that as a terrible drug, they were just prejudiced against it. So prejudice against someone who doesn't pass a drug test is going to be around, and it just takes time, I guess, for prejudice to be overcome.
I think we need to hear more success stories, and I think we need to have employers who have employed folks, who have given them a second chance, to stand up and say something about it, about how good that experience was, about how that helped. And I really do think that would help a lot if people would stand up and tell their story.
Jessica. Scott Ingram. I just wanted to say, too, that it's people like Melanie and Samantha that come up and take their time and share their personal experiences, which they don't have to do, to support a cause like this. And I think they really need a round of applause for what they've done today. It's the wonderful work that you do. You impact your communities, you impact your clients, you impact your professors in what you do, and you're the solution to that, I believe. Thanks.
I concur. Thank you.
I got something to say. How to change all this is we have to change our society and our culture. I got my bachelor's degree here in social work, and I started my master's. I got too sick and couldn't finish it, but it put me on the path to speaking. So woohoo, we can talk about all these challenges and we can give voice to other people. We talk about stereotypes and assumptions and people's incorrect perceptions in social work about other people. And I think it starts with all of us. It's not just people who, when we say recovery, we need to have recovery programs for everybody. Not just people who've gone through addiction, which is a lot of us. Beth talked about childhood traumas. Well, we need healing for those. We need recovery programs for anybody who's been through adverse childhood experiences and adult experiences. So it's up to us. It's up to us to change West Virginia.
It's interesting, Sabrina, that you said that, when you talk about therapy, what kind of access to therapy and psychotherapy is there in this region, and how is there a stigma around even looking for help for, mental illnesses or, just help in therapy?
Oh, yes, there's still a stigma, unfortunately. You hear derogatory terms spoken about mental illness. I know we're blessed in Beckley to have lots of psychiatrists, but other places like McDowell County, Wyoming County, those folks are driving to Beckley for psychiatric care. They go to the mental health centers when they are able to, but those folks are very, very busy also, and there's a need for more psychiatric help also.
I heard a TED Talk, if I could just really quickly, I think it was last year or a while back, and it talked about mental illness and how we look at mental illness, and it kind of stuck with me when they said, if you had a broken leg, you wouldn't tell somebody to just shake it off, get over it. You would go get the proper treatment and care to fix your broken leg. But if somebody is struggling with a mental illness, you tell them to stop being a wuss and shake it off, and then it just perpetuates the problem, it seems. And that to me was kind of the eye-opening statement that, thanks to TED Talks, helped me see, or at least understand at least part of that argument and that argument and what's going on there.
Well, I think that speaks to the fact that as human beings that we have a greater tendency to understand when we've had some exposure and we've listened and we've met somebody in person that is able to tell us their story, and it makes seeing that other perspective much easier if we do that as humans. At least that's how I find it. And I don't know that we have enough opportunities to see that in our digital world, where we have our heads buried all the time.
That's a whole nother conversation, right?
Yeah.
Next panel discussion on that one. I think we have time for one more question. If anybody else has one, to raise your hand. Questions, comments? Dr. Sarah Beasley. And while Lucas makes his way over there, I'll just say that this has been definitely inspiring for me. It's a big challenge. I'm born and raised in southern West Virginia. I'm familiar with a lot of these struggles, but seeing your faces here and seeing you listening intently, shaking your heads, talking about the tough topics, asking the tough questions, and pressing each other and being there for each other has really been inspiring. So I know that it's a big challenge and a mountain to climb, but we've climbed them before, right? A little grit there for you, Dr. Beasley.
Right. Well, I just wanted to thank you all and commend everyone, too, for the work they're doing. And just maybe hear a little bit more from Mr. Chafin. I know I had the opportunity 8 or 9 years ago to live in your home county for several months and just was really shocked by seeing those long lines out of the pharmacies and the doctor's offices. And I don't know if you could just describe that some more and paint the picture. And that was almost 10 years ago. And, why does it take so long for the attention to come to Southern West Virginia? And I appreciate what you're doing and what you're all doing, because I think it takes events like this today to focus the attention on the epidemic for change to happen. So I don't know if you can describe some more of that, those problems where you're from, but I just was shocked by seeing those long lines of people at those pharmacies, and it's great to hear that you're going after the ones who brought the pills into West Virginia.
Well, I know the doctor's office he's talking about because it's down from my office in Williamson, was in the post office building. Out-of-state cars all around the block. When they finally raided the office, they found $500,000 in cash, and the doctor had signed a prescription pad that thick, just signed it, and they had a secretary just give you the prescription for $50. That's all you had to pay. And she finally went to prison, but there's been a breakdown, I think, from the DEA all the way down. There's a lot of accountability here, and as we develop the discovery in these cases, it's all going to come out who's responsible and how they failed. So we're on them.
Thank you. Thank you.
We had a very similar situation in McDowell County down in Mayberry at the clinic down there. And you could drive by there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and these people are in line waiting on the doctor to get there. So shutting down these pill mills is a big part of how we fight this problem. And then we also have to make sure that the system that's in place in the pharmacies to check these prescriptions to make sure that, people aren't coming in, daily at one pharmacy to the next. The biggest problem with that is these people pay cash. When you can buy a pill for $2 and sell it for $30 on the street, then you can afford to come in and buy many, many more of them by cash. So we have to stop that flow of prescriptions.
We talked a little bit about pill mills and what's being done to crack down on pill mills and what's being done within the medical community and how they're teaching doctors to treat chronic pain on our last episode of Inside Appalachia. And again, you can check that out on iTunes or Downcast or wherever you get your podcast. I just want to say one last thing. I'm a first-generation college student, which I learned a few years ago means a little something. It means that, that it's different, that, people, I didn't necessarily know what it was like to go to college or how I was going to get through it. I just knew that that's what I was supposed to do, right? So when we have these academic panel discussions, I, still feel a little out of place somewhat. And I just wonder if there's anybody out there listening to this conversation that says, what the heck are they talking about? They've talked about all this other stuff, and they didn't even mention this thing. What are we missing in this conversation, if there's anything that we're missing?
Education.
Education. Hey, and we're...
Yeah.
How important do you think education is and what's that connection in the opioid epidemic?
Oh, it's tremendous. I think, and you're right, it starts very small. The opportunities that we provide children to see that the world is a big place and that they have opportunities and possibilities. If you only see a narrow view of what you see in your community, you have no idea of what's possible or potential. And if you don't hear other folks who've had those experiences, you don't think it's possible for yourself. So, really incorporating that. And I do think education is very, very important for folks economically, and making those opportunities available to them close to home.
Jessica, if you want an eye-opening experience, don't try to pass the school bus sometime. Follow the school bus for a while and watch the students get off. You'll see one student that gets off, it'll have the mother there, it gets to, hugs the child, and it's just so nice. You'll see another child get off with no coat in a cold winter day. They'll have a little trailer house up on the hill with the windows out, and you can just follow each down, and you can see the education opportunities that child might have as opposed to the next child. Right. And it's a social economic situation too that makes people get into drugs and what have you. Kids go to school sometime, they didn't have anything to eat that day, they had some boyfriend maybe living with their mother that was maybe beating her up on drugs, and the school is the nicest, friendliest place that they can ever go that day. And then yet, people raise a lot of Cain because they can't pass the test and do that. They're hungry, they're cold, they're tired. So you follow the school bus and you'll see which children, are exposed. So that's part of the problem. That's how you get in, very young children get into drugs and what have you. They just don't have the opportunity. But education, it goes back to that. If we can get them educated, then there's hope.
Because it's been shown and proven that usually with more education comes more opportunities for jobs and higher
We have to start,
incomes.
as President Kennedy said, this might not be done this year, it might not be done in 10 years, but let's start today.
Anything else? Just want to make sure. All right, well, I think that concludes our panel discussion for today. I want to thank you all for being here so much. Again, you can probably hear excerpts of this conversation on Inside Appalachia in an upcoming episode. So thank you so much for joining us for our second live taping of this show. And thanks to Concord University and the Social Work Department for allowing us to be here and host Inside Appalachia and West Virginia Public Broadcasting here at this facility. Be sure, again, to check us out on iTunes, Downcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on Twitter @InAppalachia and send us those stories at feedback@wvpublic.org. Thanks so much.